Hello, everybody. Warm welcome to this UK Deaf Leadership webinar. I'm Stuart Harrison, and I'm the director for Deaf and Hearing Trailblazers. We're co-hosting this webinar series in conjunction with our partners who are Action Deafness. Again, a warm welcome to everybody here today present for this conversation that we're going to have, which I'm really looking forward to, with our special guest today. Before we go on, let me explain a little bit about the questions that we're going to be asking our guests today. We're going to have a conversation for around about an hour, and if you have any burning questions that you want to propose to our guest, please put them into the Q&A section of Zoom. I will be checking that later on. If we do have time, we will go to your questions. Okay. So without further ado, I am super delighted to welcome in our special guest today, who is Nadia. So welcome, Nadia.
Hello there. How are you? Are you well?
Yeah, great. Hi, Nadia. I'm really pleased to have you here with us today. I know you're a very, very busy person.
And thank you for the invitation. Good timing in my schedule, which has been action-packed, and finally I had this time available.
Yeah, great. So before we get into the questions, into the nitty-gritty and the deeper delving questions, what I would like to do to begin with is to ask you if you can share with us a little bit about your family situation, your family background, where you come from, where you grew up, what it was like to be a deaf girl for yourself.
Okay. I have moved several times, but however, in terms of my family history, we come from Sri Lanka. And back then, it was colonized by the British, which means that my father, going back generations, would all be British, not waving that Sri Lankan flag yet. So when my father moved here at the age of 17, through a scholarship with UCLan, which was a degree in technology, a very bright, intelligent man. So that's how he successfully was able to come here to Britain at the age of 17, qualified, married my mom, Sri Lankan also, and we moved to East London. And then a decision was made that because both of them loved traveling around the world, the children became a priority, of which there's myself and my brother. There's only the two of us. So we moved to Luton. That's where I am with my brother. That's where we're born, and that's where we've always been. Now, can you imagine back in the 70s? I am a 70s girl. And Luton Deaf Club was a very strong community at the time, heavily involved in sport, community networking, amazing. And my parents had a lucky opportunity of meeting with deaf adults. They were very open-minded. Now, my brother is 1 year older than me and knew, I can't remember when age he was diagnosed, but because of him and because of close in age, they knew that I would be. But fortunately, at that time, the National Deaf Children's Society was really good at that time. And this was in the 70s. Can you imagine? Because I have spoken to others, they didn't have that, but we did have that Luton Deaf community, which was very strong. And once a child was diagnosed as deaf, that call was made and contacted other hearing parents and other deaf parents, all of us of a similar age. So my mom was hugely open and asking what to do with their children, and also learned sign language. So just know that it's Sri Lankan by history, but they were very motivated parents. The Luton Deaf Club provided a nursery every week, which meant that deaf adults looked after the children, as well as teaching parents sign language as well. So that's how I was raised, with sign language. I did go to a mainstream school, but there was a fairly big deaf population within school. We had good teachers, and I feel as though we had communication support workers back then, but I felt there were proper interpreters, because even amongst the hearing classroom, the interpreter was there voicing over me, and I felt I was the leader in the class in comparison to my hearing, because we would be involved in debates and sports. I was the one that was always assertive.
Mm.
I was always the one that was leading. It was the hearing ones in my class that wouldn't do anything. So I felt I had excellent support with my two languages. And in terms of my family, friends, my local network, being deaf was the norm. There was nothing bad about it, because my parents were open, spoke to the neighbours, saying this is their daughter. I did go to boarding school, of which was Mary Hare Grammar School, because my parents listened to deaf parents and said, go to mainstream because you've got a good chance. Let her go to Mary Hare. And that was back in the 90s. And that's where I was educated, got involved. And once I left there, I went to a local college. And then that's when I had access to a proper interpreter. But I have to say, thanks to my father, because he was always involved in the deaf community. My mother was the secretary for the National Deaf Children's Society, alongside a deaf sheriff. So they could see how interpreters were used, how to facilitate interpreters. So when I went to college, I had no idea, because Mary Hare didn't tell us anything at that time. We had to lip read. My father said, you're absolutely fine. I've told the teacher, please provide an interpreter. And they said, we've already booked an interpreter. Now, I was somewhat shy at that time. It's like, why do I need an interpreter for? My father saying, no, 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 it's a good thing. He already had that awareness. He knew that it was all about the access for me. And I said yes. And that was for myself and my brother. We had the same upbringing. We went in different directions in terms of university. He did not have an interpreter. He struggled. He was hearing well enough in comparison to me, because I was profoundly deaf sign language user. My father knew the difference between the two of us, but do believe that he should have had an interpreter. My brother said he was fine, but he did struggle. I didn't. I progressed through university, had an interpreter present, and I have to thank my parents' strong belief pushing me forward. So I learned from them. They were also involved in campaigning. They also spoke about our rights. They influenced me. They influenced the Luton deaf community where I was raised.
Wow, wow. Such an interesting story of integration and socialization, with your family, and then being welcomed within the deaf community and joining and being part of it, of both tribes, shall we say. You've had a very positive aspect for communication within that environment. So, wow, that is amazing, completely different than the experiences we've had from other guests on this webinar series. But it's really interesting to see what you can do with the right.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
All good.
So let's get down to the nitty gritty. Why we're here, why we invited you, Nadia.
Go for it.
I think we met last year and I saw you as Cleopatra at the Globe in London. We met after the production and we went out for something to eat and we had a conversation. And I thought, wow, I'm really impressed. I can learn so much about acting, really, to begin with, and also as actor, going for an audition using sign language, then having to wait and find out whether you've been selected or not, given the script, showing that script to the direction, saying to the director what you need to do, how to act this, and taking that guidance and direction from the director.
And that would be common for other plays. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, so for your situation within Cleopatra, it was different, was it not? You was
Different.
brought in and you led the production. Can you explain what that really means?
It was a long process. And as you say, you're absolutely right. When you look at all theatres, they have all of that in place. In our case, it was different. Now, this started back in 2018. and they had a new art director appointed for the Globe. So out with the old, in with the new. And that person had already won an Oliver Award, successful actress. She was very keen and motivated and wanted to be that art director on the area of Shakespeare. And when she was brought in, she wanted to do something different from all of the other experiences. And she wanted to bring in the old style Shakespearian of that time, because they only used 12 actors, obviously all male, but that same cast, ensemble as we call it. And they had emailed my agent and said, can we ask for a meeting with Nadia? When it said meeting, I didn't think anything of it. I was keen on the topic of the two plays in one with the same ensemble that were interchangeable between these two plays, which I thought was something different. Anyway, I went along. I did bring my own preferred interpreter because knew me, knowledgeable on Shakespeare. She herself was also an actress. Prepared me for the types of questions that may be asked, because we didn't know what the meeting would entail. So I went along with my interpreter, very informal conversation, two directors and the art director, and her name was Michelle Sherry, I think. Anyhow, we had an informal conversation, really, really lovely, and they just wanted to see my style, was it comfortable? Because this is something that was going to be different. It was not the norm. This was going to be unique. And just in general conversation, just carried on through. And the next morning, really early morning, I got a text saying, you had the role. And I went, really? But what did that entail? But it was a beautiful ensemble. But the most difficult thing was pressure. I was the only deaf person. Sign language within a performance, the translation, the timing, pressure, stress was very high, and I'm talking high stress, but everybody was learning at the same time. Dealing with experienced actors, yes, but each of us were all stressed because of this type of different approach, but could understand why it happened. And then the following year again, but their thing was half of the actors would be of the original play and half would go into the next play. So that's how it evolved. And that's how it happened. And I had said to my director, I have a dream of being Cleopatra, having a chat, how to sound. But I remembered that dream vividly. And just, that kind of random conversation. But it did open up her eyes to this and said, you do know that within Shakespeare there is. And I said, stop teasing me. You're only saying it because I told you about my dream. She said, no, would you like to? So I was being asked a direct question. Me, Cleopatra, and she was like fairly determined. Is it what you want? This is the dream that you've had. Maybe fate is speaking to you. And I just went, okay, yeah. That was my answer. They got in touch with the art director and said, are you still interested? And I just went, okay. But at the back of my mind, I knew that play would be the most difficult play of all of the Shakespearean plays. You can adapt them, but this one is crazy extreme, because a lot of directors don't want to direct that type of play. And I had said yes. But luckily enough, the process was incredibly beautiful, because it was all about looking at the script. Now, first of all, you have to look at the overall story. What does the story entail? Food for thought, looking at what the conversations were evolving. How am I going to evolve as Cleopatra? And from that point, I remember them trying out different types of playing around with the language. And then COVID came along. This was in 2020. At the same time, I felt I wasn't ready. There was something amiss, but thankfully it was cancelled. I know because of COVID, but I was actually thankful it was cancelled. They never said it was completely out, but it's just that there was no theatre happening. It wasn't something that was for me, it was for everybody else. But I did feel a sense of relief, profound relief.
Wow. That moment when you felt you weren't right, you weren't ready, that in a gut feeling, then COVID hit. You know, for you, that was a positive experience.
Yes, because it gave me time to find out who I am. Because I had said to them, in terms of the process of who was going to be part of the cast, the language elements, would it only be sign language? Because previously I was only the one, I was the only one. But then in another play, I had another actor. We were able to provide support to each other. But then when I was going, Cleopatra again, I'm the only one, how is that going to work? It gave me a lot of food for thought. But then what I thought, send an email to the team and saying, yes, in terms of the future, if it's not me, you know, here are some of the ideas around the language elements. But back then they had said no. But luckily enough, I would say in 2022 or thereabouts. Like 2021, they did check in. How are things going? I'm going, yeah, all is good. I'm doing a different play. And again, I was the lead. But there was one difficulty is that I was the only deaf person. Experience of the Globe. Those that are of high profile, you know, the Royal Theatre in Manchester, you know, all of these high profile venues I was involved in as lead. I had developed that confidence. I had met with a range of art directors, and they would say to me, you know, you can express your feelings as a deaf person. I always teach deaf awareness and say, but you're deaf, you're confident, you have your own culture, it's really interesting, and you can make it integrated into the play, you know, incredibly beautiful. So that was being said, and I just went, from now on, please, let's have a minimum of two deaf actors, not just one, because you have hearing actors that are learning to sound, which is not representative of the real world. They were okay to that. And then when they said yes, and I went, oh, okay, let's try this. And I feel I'm very lucky in the opportunity of being involved in the Globe circuit. I was already a member of the Globe. I wasn't staff, but I was part of the acting crew. I had the opportunity to learn as we were going along. And with the art director, I had just said, with the Globe, I don't want it all about accessibility. Interpreters, captioning, but let's look at it from an artistic point of view, which is difficult, you know, sometimes it doesn't work, but this is all part of theatre world. And they said, well, you make the decision, you decide. And there was one play that I had watched at the Globe. Again, other challenge, it wasn't Shakespeare, but it was another writer. I think it was Chris Marlowe. Really old, but absolutely fantastic. Rather complex in the work that needs to be done. And many directors, even now, don't want to deal with that type of work. But one person did come through and said, yes, I want to look into this. And I watched it. I enjoyed it, even though it was a difficult play. Watched it again. Absolutely loved it. And I realized that directors can deal with complex play. I already knew that with AC. I already knew it would be difficult, but then it gave me food for thought. And then I just went, okay, the rules of the Globe is who is the director, because the previous director decided to quit because it was too difficult. You know, it was for personal reasons. But at the same time, I just went, how is all of this going to work? And I had said, what do you think will, because this person has quit, do you still want to go ahead? And I said, yes, because it's so rare for a deaf lead. And I wanted to take this opportunity. I wanted to work with it, but it was more about the how. But then a thought came to mind. You can work with a director that is experienced of the Globe, that can cope with the different plays, its complexities, managing the whole process. And I went, do you know what? This particular director, are you available? They said yes. And I said, okay. And we also had the time as a team of 4. I talked about my vision of the play, because we had Egypt, we had the Romans, and it wasn't so much about the play, but looking at the Egyptians and Romans in the wildlife, in in real life, like what were the Egyptians doing? Were there interpreters present? What languages were at play? And we had that type of conversation with the realization that the Egyptians can be deaf with one language only. The Romans would have their own language. You would have seen that play. So you saw how the interplay of the languages happened and how they came together at the end and how an interpreter got in there. So that was how we were able to integrate the interpreter into the play. And then once that conversation was had, it was to the director to reenact it and to work with a deaf consultant, but was working as an assistant. And I had wished, looking back, that was a co-director position because the director makes the final decision. The assistant is told what to do. The assistant knew that there were some elements that wouldn't work for a deaf audience. It was kind of awkward. That was a particular learning, that it would be best to have a co-director in place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When we talk about that concept of co-working, for us here at Trailblazers, we look at that wherever possible to have co-leadership, for deaf and hearing people working together in alignment, to see where we can benefit one another and look at those different perspectives.
You're absolutely right. And that's what I had learned at the Globe specifically, having that freedom, our rules, our vision, and coming together and all of that. Now, you saw how it happened, but it was a very long process. We did have time to translate the script. We looked at who can provide language support, translation support. At the beginning, it was quite overwhelming, but I have to say the cast were fantastic. Possibly one of the best casts that I have had. I would say there's three that would never worked with deaf people before or involved in the deaf community. The remainder already had qualifications. Some of them were already qualified interpreters, qualified actor, of which there were two. One was a trainee and one was at level 3. With the other three became hugely interested in the concept of deaf. And I have said to them from the get-go, there has to be deaf awareness training for all of the team, including all of the staff at the Globe. They were open to that. That happened. So that's how it progressed and evolved.
I can see, there's a lot of preparatory work that must be done compared to, shall we say, the normal system. You got to really work backwards with your timeline, getting the team together, making sure you have that cohesiveness there before you can go ahead with the usual work within the theatre.
You're right. And the cast, because we as a team were the largest in comparison to all of the other plays. We were the largest, but it was the most successful and the one that sold the most. So we were able to cover the cast. And then yesterday they announced our play will be online, professional videography. So for those that missed it, can watch it online with captioning.
I'm really pleased to see that because, very often people will feel that communicating with the deaf people is a very expensive option. It's not really. At the end of the day, you've done well, as you said, with ticket sales.
They did, and you're right.
And it's really important to mention this diversity that you have there within your team.
Yes, we did. We were very diverse in terms of colour, deafness, and we also had actors that were oral deaf. And the character was about SSE, which was brilliant, and it worked really well. It gelled really well in terms of the characters and hearing people knowing the sign language. And it was all about following the play, but the play was already there, it existed, and we looked at the reasons and the rationale of the characters that it would influence the play.
So you would say that the preparatory work was genuine rather than tokenistic?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I felt it.
Thanks for sharing that, Nadia, because as a leader within the leadership field, your dream, you had that inspiration to make that become true is rather amazing. So I want to move on to my next question for you. So looking back for that performance, and you had an interview with the Guardian newspaper, okay, and the Guardian spoke about you feeling it was an amazing thing to achieve your dream. A quote taken from that interview. Um, as a deaf brown woman who is a BSL user who doesn't use speech. So, Nadia, how did that vision come about, as a leader within theatre and film, for example? How does that work practically?
Yeah, interesting. We're looking at different elements here. I mean, it was the journalist that had said did not use speech. There weren't more words. I did say deaf, and we do experience discrimination because we're deaf and barriers. And sometimes there are barriers in terms of color, and sometimes there are barriers because I am a woman. But then with the additional barrier, they talked about sign language. I don't speak English, but I have sign language. I am a lead role. And within that article and within social media, a lot of people were unaware about deaf. And they said that newspaper article inspired them. And I think because the word non-speaking that they had added, because not speaking comes from the mouth, but I'm already speaking through my hands. I am already. So the word speak and the dictionary definition of speak is quite difficult to try and translate. However, it was good awareness for the hearing population that did not know about deafness and had the opportunity to read that article to gain an understanding. And the feedback that I got was really good because prior to that article, I'm just trying to think how I was, there were trollers out there on social media. And they would say things like, use sign language in Shakespeare. Not, no, 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 no. Or you are of color. No. So it was either being deaf, being of color, being a woman. You doing a show like that? No. You are of color in that character? No. You're using sign language for that character? No. There was quite a range of negative feedback out there. But within the Globe, there is a press department, and they had felt, no, this is not okay. So had the opportunity to talk to the Guardian journalist, lovely guy, willing to spend hours and hours asking me questions. And I would say 2 hours just having a conversation with them. And he was hugely interested. And the first thing that he had said, I could see his nervousness. And when he arrived, we were at rehearsal. It was lunchtime. An introduction was made. Are you ready? The journalist coming. Are you ready? So they came along to the rehearsal, and I was leading with sign language, and the director is talking, through the interpreter, and I, in my character role, was signing away, and the journalist, you could see that facial
Mm,
expression of shock.
hmm
Wasn't expecting that at all. And seeing that interplay between the director, me, and the character, I became fascinated. So obviously gave him time to think of questions to articulate. And then a few weeks later, went for the interview, was given a lovely cup of tea in a basket, biscuit. And the first question that came out of him was, I was surprised at the silence in the room. I didn't think of that. Silence for him, not for me. Silence would mean that there is no movement, there's no physical, visual movement. The grass is not growing, the sun is still. That is my definition of silence. But for him, it was sound based. I was moving, but for him, it was silent, and he was fascinated. But what an interesting question that he had given, and it gave me an idea of how he was seeing me. And that started the conversation about how did you grow up? And I said, I've got my GSE, I went to university, I've done this job, I've done that job. Completely fascinated. And then I showed my script of the play. Now, with a script, we have a translation of it into BSL. And I gave the written script. I said, that's your translation. Wow. So sign language elements, you know, doing the research, the process, and he was gobsmacked by that process as well. And that article helped society change and realize the reasons why, the reasons what we are who we are. And also Shakespeare is about being tight and owning the script. Now we're here in 2025. We now live differently. We have mixed race. We have different languages at play. You cannot expect the sameness. Those days are gone. You have to look at, yes, keeping the style of Shakespeare and its traditions, but meet it with today's society. And that article helped everyone else to make that change.
Mm. I've always felt really frustrated, with social media and media, particularly newspapers. There are times where things are still quite clear they haven't got it. For that journalist, that article you spoke about, I think it was a really thoughtful interview and inspiring to look at, the work that you do, Nadia.
And you're right. Media can be cruel. That is absolute. Inside and outside of the newspaper world, but we have that lived experience. How do we say what we need to say? And at the same time, we have to consider other people's perspectives. Like his word in using the word silence, I don't feel that, but I have to consider that feeling, that thought. And how do we meet halfway between the two different perspectives?
Yeah, thank you for that, Nadia. So my next question, let's go back to earlier days in your career. You went to the International Visual Theatre in Paris. So from that experience, Nadia, and that knowledge you learned, how would you say that shaped your leadership style?
Yes and no. But do remember at that time, I was actually living in Australia, which was wonderful. Job-wise, as an actor and in the art world, we're talking about the early 2000s, there was a barrier. There was an attitudinal barrier. They did not believe deaf could lead, deaf could be creative, could be in the arts, in film. It was really poor and awful. It was an attitudinal barrier. Whereas now it exists, but it was the attitude at that time that needed to be changed. I was studying, I was doing a degree, I was at university, I became a teacher because a high percent of deaf people in Australia, most all are teachers. So I just went, okay, I'll do that. Back then I was married and I moved to France, Paris. I was still a teacher, but in the back of my mind, I was just thinking I'll continue to be limited. But one person that I had met, because I had to learn French and langue sans français, French sign language, and they did have a budget to allow me to do that. And as I progressed, one person within the building, a member of staff, took sight of me and said, "You got beautiful sign language, you're a quick learner." And I went, "Yeah, yeah, 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 yeah." And he said, "No, no, no, you're quite incredible, and I want you to come with me." Took me to a room, which was a library, full of information about deaf of France, its history, including the present, and then came to me and took out this particular IB, it's called an IBT. And I looked at it and I said, "But what's this about?" And they said, "This is a theatre, all run by deaf, no hearing involvement. The only involved has administrators and interpreters, but the entire theatre, performance, everything, directors, producers, all of them are all deaf." My mind didn't go, "Oh, wow," because in Australia, I had limited my thinking. And this person said, "Well, why don't you come along, have a look?" And they were having an open day on different courses. And I went, okay. And I went, and that's where I was impacted. Arrived in a beautiful building that belonged to them. I just thought a small little manky theatre, but everyone inside there was using sign language. There was deaf leading workshop. There were so many things happening by deaf. And I just said, "Well, who's leading the whole thing?" and it's a particular name sound that the interpreter doesn't know, but it was an actor that had won the equivalent of an Olivier Award.
The Molières.
Similar to that in France, the very first step in the 80s, well before Marilyn Matlin won the Oscars. But this is in the theatre world. The first one became an art director, met her, and I just went, she's deaf. And I mean, she was a fluent sign language user. And that caused me to change, to cause me to realize. And I said, oh, well, I was studying. And they said, no, you can come every week for a workshop for the next 2 years, got involved. Now, having a deaf teacher was strict, brilliant, taught as well, wasn't aiming for a standard, but high standard. And I was pushed every single time. My fire had gone out, but this had caused my fire to be reignited. And that other person came back and said, you've got the leader potential, you're a natural, you know the how, do something about it. Don't remain silent, do it. I went, okay. But then I had another job in France. It was a French island, has a teacher. Now, I loved teaching, but did I want to teach forever? I always had the theatre, even with my father, he would take me to theatre and I would enjoy it. And I would say to him, one day I will, but Australia caused me to limit my thinking. In France, it changed me. Then I went through a divorce. Then I moved back here to England. And then we had the Definitely Theatre. We had Paula leading it, got involved, did the learning, and here we are. It changed who I am. I'm more assertive. I have a belief, but it took a very long journey to get to that point.
Yeah. Listening to you then, Nadia, for me, it's something about deaf people needing other deaf leaders to be identified, to have that potential within them also recognized. It makes it more difficult for a hearing person to do, would you say, for a hearing person to identify within deaf people their potential.
Yeah, yeah. And that would be natural. Some hearing people know that you have it. Now, I do have two directors. One is of the best 100 directors in the UK. They saw it in me. I had dinner with them, obviously at different times, and had said to me, are you going to do something? What are you going to do? You have it. I worked with you in rehearsals. You have creative ideas. What are you doing? So they pushed me individually. Sometimes I myself would think, but how? And they said, well, if you want anything, let me know. When I had dinner with another director Christmas time, obviously with an interpreter, I said, are you going to do something? I went, do you know what? That other director had said the same. Obviously, I do need to do something. But thanks to lockdown, it allowed me to look back at my journey of who and what I was. I was bumbling along with different jobs, but what do I want? What am I doing? What are my next steps? AC changes. And also there was the writing. I started writing plays. I was a lead. I was inspired by Jeff, and last year it was very successful with the AC. Now I'd given my script over, the actors are deaf, the director's deaf, and the number one thing for me, and one of the difficulties in theatre, is always about the translation. When I speak with those who are hearing, they say, but how do you do it? You have to translate it into that type of structure with the time to look at the well-being and the emotive of the character. And I don't want other deaf actors to have that same experience. And that's how it's been for the past 2 years. I'm getting there. Bearing in mind my two art directors, plus the influence that I have from France, all of them approached me, and I made that next step. And as we know,
Mm.
the rest happened.
People will say that, society or environment's giving you the confidence to realize that you have it, you've got it, and you've done
Yeah.
something with it.
The only difficulty is that those that know you, I want something, but where am I going? Where is the guidance out there? And the number one thing for me is to get involved in everything in it. Whatever is offered, grab it, irregardless of a tight schedule, because you learn from it. You get a taste of it. You learn from it. You go to different places. Okay, I am learning all of these different processes. I am learning all of these different steps. I make a note of everything. And also the number one thing is trust. Because we know that media can be cruel. Theatre can also be cruel. Ideas can be taken away from you. Your ideas can be given away to somebody else. But it's also about control, belief, remembering what I've always been told, the tips that I've learned along the way, all of that.
So for those of you who are watching now, if you do feel that you have an idea, you have something there for a project, take inspiration from Nadia's words, find someone that you can learn from, that you can trust, and then work with them on that project and work on that idea.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and you're absolutely right. Now, my best friend that I grew up with is Dippa
Mm-hmm.
C3. She is incredible. She works with the Arts Council of England. She has progressed within the Arts Council. She is responsible for funding, an excellent lead. And I remember she was invited to do a presentation, and she always said, if there's something that you want to do, always ask. And that's what I did. She also said the same. If there's something that you want, ask for it. Don't remain silent. Now, when I started at the academy, I had a dream, do you remember? But there's no harm in asking, because you never know who you're talking to. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense, but just self-expression. Ask the question. Because there will be leaders out there. Ask the question. If they say, no, you're not ready, it's not the right time, always ask, express how you feel, even if it's nonsensical, because someone out there might say it's not nonsensical. You can be guided by others along the way.
Thank you. That's good advice there for everybody who's watching. And Nadia, you've worked in a variety of environments, creatively. You've been in theatre, television, also film. So from those three, which are markedly different from each other, how do you adapt your own personal leadership style and approach to each of those industries?
Not easy, I will say that. But in terms of skill, you have to learn a lot of theatrical skills that will aid your other skills within TV and films. A lot of famous people have said the same. You can go from theatre film into theatre. You can go from theatre into TV and movies. Do you know the famous actress Judi Dench? I mean, she's in her 90s, involved in Madam M in Bond 007. And she had said, I advise you as young people, yes, you want to get into TV movies, but if you want to develop your skills, go to theatre first. And she's absolutely right, because I did try to be an actress because I would fail the auditions. I didn't have the skill set needed. So then I focused my attention on theatre. That's where I got the learning. That's where I got those substantial skills and knowledge in comparison to TV and movies. And then when I went back and started auditioning, then I started getting the roles. It is because I was able to develop those skills, that depth of knowledge, experience, feeling, and adapting to characters. I learned all of that through theatre. When it comes to writing and directing, I have to say I enjoyed the film directing. I did try theatre directing. Oh no, I hated it because it's such a different world in comparison. I loved the writing and handing it over. But when it came to theatre, I was handed over to the director. I did try 2 or 3 times. The plays were successful, but I personally didn't enjoy the process. You have to trust your initiative. You have to trust your gut and think about what it is that you enjoy. But theatre directing was the worst experience of all for me. It was exhausting. even though I had written the play. And when I delegated it over, felt a lot better. But when it comes to movies and theatre, now recently was directing a play. I had a vision. I was the lead. All of the others were hearing. There was only a few of us that were deaf. And I had that vision, that belief. I wanted to say, this is the why, this is the how, have that conversation, look at compromising. And I love teamwork. And that's what I learned from theatre. It's always about being a member of the team, because there isn't just one person that deals with everything. That doesn't work. Because you can't be without the stage manager. You can't be without all of the other cogs in the wheel. It's always about being a team, working together, learning from each other, compromising, adapting, mutual agreement. All of that comes into play. That will also happen within TV and movies.
Mm. That's really interesting that you say that, actually. That notion of team. Probably it's more important than the actual lead or role of
Oh,
lead.
yeah, you're absolutely right. You're right. You're right. Number one, team. But who has the concept? You need a good lead that can share that vision to allow the team to contribute to that vision. You need a good lead with the idea, lead the conversation. And remember, people are human, very diverse, different upbringings, different education, different age, different ethnicity, different race, different sexualities. You have to consider all of that, but get all of those different perspectives when you're leading the idea. It's that idea and allow the conversation to happen, but you have to be able to lead that kind of conversation.
It is really, really interesting, actually, that concept of things being so different in different domains, as you say.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm just looking at the time at the moment, and we only have about 10 minutes left.
Can't believe it's gone so
Wow.
fast.
Wow. It's quite clear you have a very hectic career and schedule, and it can be very difficult to manage, particularly with one such as high profile as yours. How do you find that space? How do you find that ability to be an advocate for other people and also looking at it from an inclusion perspective? How do you find the time?
Aye, aye, aye. When I look back, I am often gobsmacked at like, how have I done all of this? The primary thing is to remember who and what you are. Look after yourself first and foremost, because there's a lot of external pressures out there. You have to look at your own mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And in terms of advocacy, I have an identity that is relevant. And then you look at supporting others. But in terms of my space, I couldn't stand alone, because you know of what is being, you know what is being said out there. And remember, my parents, they were advocates. I watched them. I was in the march with them. My mother was very strong in her, because the local council refused myself and my brother and others to go to Mary Hare School. They said, you're going to local school, and my parents not having it. But luckily enough, there were other parents that came together. So I had learned a good quote from a deaf person from work ages ago, and had said that, what was it? The Native Americans, the Inuits, the indigenous, I can't spell it properly, but with the indigenous people, they say the English came to us with their coloured outfits to colonize us. But within North America, they had different tribes. One arrow will easily break from one tribe. But what they did was they went to all of the different tribes. Can we have your arrows? Can we build up our supply? So that it was unbreakable. That concept I took with me. I have to find my tribe, those that are the same as me, bring them all together and be together. But you still, has a team, you still need a lead. For me, I led and the team that I needed in order to be able to make the advocacy work.
Wow. Wow. That's a really, really important thing to learn. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I have to thank my old deaf boss, who was a leader in their own right.
We've spoken about the different people who've helped you over your life, over your journey. You spoke about your parents quite in detail, the hearing community and deaf community alike. But of those people you've encountered or you look back on, who do you feel has been the most inspirational for yourself on your journey?
Okay. When I was small and as I was growing up, there were two. When I was little, I used to watch the See Here program, and I feel very fortunate that we had that when I was growing up. It didn't exist for other generations, but See Here was a new program at that time. I think it was around about 1980 something. And they would have different presenters. And then when it came to performances, it was Dot Miles. She was a poet. She was a storyteller, and I was mesmerized by her. And I would say to my mom, look at her, look at her. I love her signing. And my mother knew that I had that artistic element in me. And my mother very clearly said to me, you can be the same as her. And I looked at her and I went, I can be like her. And go, yeah, one day I will. But she appeared on a regular basis, and I would always get my mother's attention. She said, she's there again, she's there again, look, look, look. But never thought at that time of being a poet and how a poet expresses themselves through sign language. Anyhow, knew about that creative element. Then Dot Miles wrote a book, and I went, wow. And I still remember, like, my very first movie, that where she stood up, and it just, I had that flashback when I read her book, and then made a documentary about Dot Miles, and it was the legacy of Dorothy Miles. And that I remember watching with pride, being involved, because she was my role model. And when I was a TV presenter, she was my role model. She was my first and foremost. The second one, in terms of human rights advocacy, was Dr. Lisa Kaupin, based in Finland. And she was the first woman that was the president of the World Federation of the Deaf. The men previously, but it's now gone back into men again. But specifically, she was a deaf woman leading the world with all of these different continents. And I learned from her because she did a lot of different video presentations. I just liked her way of saying, you have rights. She had the words, she had the signs, and I felt inspired by her. So if she's a lead, I'm going to be the next generation lead and inspire others.
I'd like to come back to that in just one moment. We have a few moments left. So, you've mentioned your work in the deaf environment and also the hearing environment. When you're alone as a deaf person in a hearing environment, how do you make your voice, your signs, your thoughts known? How are you assertive in that hearing dominant environment?
Yeah. I remember the first time that I was still having, I was in a learning mode. I did have an interpreter with me because that was my access, that was my backup, is having an interpreter beside me. When it would happen within different theatre performances, I knew I could lead because I would say to the team, on the first day, I want to provide deaf awareness training, because I will never forget one production that was in Manchester, all hearing, and they were all nervous, like having this deaf person, how they approached me, the communication. And I just went, why are they behaving like that? What is missing? The next time I just went, I want to lead deaf awareness training. It's so simplistic. Provide the deaf awareness training that will cause them to relax. I'm talking about only an hour or two. So they got to see me my humor, my culture. It's rather than pontificating to them, it was just giving them that opportunity to relax and say, that's it. And their final words would be, it's not that difficult. It's just a different language. And also how to use an interpreter. Because I would say that interpreter is not just for me, they're for you. They are to enable communication between us. You can sign, I can speak. So that's the person that's going to break the barriers between. And just remind them that the interpreter is for all of us. Don't say that it's Nadia's interpreters because you can't sign and they got to go, yeah, 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 right. It's just a reminder. And then that changes the awareness. They get enthusiastic. They wanted to learn how to sign. And I remember some of those went on to learn level 3. And one man recently got in touch through Facebook on a video chat and he said, I remember meeting you and never met a deaf person before and does creative puppetry, is now doing level 3 because I was involved in his particular project. So watching that enthusiasm and how deaf and hearing people can work together, you can be an influence to others.
Wow. Wow. Really impactful. You know, you've made a lot of impact on a lot of people. The last question, really. If you look back to the original question when we spoke about who inspired yourself as a leader, I'd like to ask what advice you would like to give to those young deaf people who are perhaps themselves, you know, actors or creatives who want to become a leader, you know, in their field, but haven't yet seen a deaf person within that field to match them as a role model. What would you say to them?
Look at the people around you that you grew up with. The first thing is, do you have self-belief? Do you believe yourself in saying, I want this? Take, for example, my experience in Australia. I felt I could not. And then when I went into another environment, I was pushed because you do get that negative vibe. Put that to the side. Think about something that makes the fire in your belly grow. Ask questions, reach out, explore, see what's happening out there in the world of TV, movies. Go out there, go watch, and hopefully approach someone within those areas. Ask questions. Who are you? Who are there? If there are free workshops, grab them. If you have to pay, do it. It's all about progress and process, building up that knowledge, building it to the point of developing your self-belief as well. And once you got those two combined, you can naturally lead and be yourself.
Your advice is wonderful, Nadia. You know, really is. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We haven't got the ability to look at some of the Q&A questions. They are there, but unfortunately, we're out of time to look at them. So, would it be okay if I sent them to you? The questions that we have been posted in the Q&A.
Absolutely. And I can provide a written response. And thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I
Yeah,
can't
thank
believe
you.
the hour went so quickly.
I've really, really enjoyed our conversation today, Nadia. Listening to yourself, you know, I actually have learned a lot from you too.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Nadia. Usually we'd show a video at the end of the series, you know, to say what's coming next within autumn, but unfortunately, we haven't got our next speaker booked. So I won't be putting the video out. What I'd like to say to everybody watching is a massive thank you for coming and joining today, watching our webinar series and this conversation. I hope you are able to take away something useful for yourselves. Please check in with our website where we will be announcing our new speaker in the autumn time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye bye now.
Bye bye bye.